Welcome to Royal Exclusive Rewind, your look back at the triumphs, drama and defining moments in royal history. This week we rewind back to the mid-2000s when a young Prince Harry found himself on a collision course with a paparazzi. Fresh out of school and with a reputation as the royal family's party prince, Harry was routinely photographed falling out of London's nightclubs before two explosive confrontations with photographers made headlines around the world. Were the paparazzi hounding a vulnerable young prince still haunted by Diana's death, or had Harry's own lifestyle made him fair game? I'm Matt Wilkinson, Royal Editor of The Sun, and joining me to unpack it all are royal journalist Phil Dampier and former Press Secretary to Queen Elizabeth II, Elsa Anderson. Right, welcome to you both. Let's go back in time. Beginning of this century, Harry was a young prince, okay? But there was a rule. You remember this, Phil. You will both remember this fondly. There was a rule where the newspapers did not try to get pictures of Harry and William when they were at school, when they were in education. This began to fall apart when the lines blurred, when you had Harry going to nightclubs, and he was going to a lot of nightclubs. There are two incidents I want to talk about. The first one was in 2004. He was 20 years old. He had a scuffle with the paparazzi at 3 a.m. outside Pangaea nightclub. The photographer suffered a cut lip. A Clarence House spokesman, one of your colleagues, Elsa, said Prince Harry was hit in the face by a camera as photographers crowded around him as he was getting into a car. In pushing the camera away, it is understood that a photographer's lip was cut. They were defending him. In March 2007, there was another incident. He was walking out of Boujis nightclub. He was apparently drunk at 3 a.m. again. Took a swing at a photographer, then fell to the ground. He was stumbling as he was trying to get into his car before being driven away. Prince Charles's office denied there was a scuffle, but the photos show different. This was an era where Harry, look, he was badly behaved, but also maybe people quite liked it and bonded with the idea that he was a young lad just going out having fun. But was this deal initially between the media and the royal family ever workable when you end up having scenes like this?
Well, the deal held very well when they were at school, and certainly when William was at St Andrews University and was dating Catherine, and they pretty much managed to get their romance off the ground there. So it did hold for a while. This was in the wake of Diana's death, as you say, in 1997. So this is 6, 7, 8 years later. It did start to crack, and he's spoken about this in Spare in his book, saying how triggering it was for him, and even now when he hears cameras whirring, it triggers memories of his mother's death, and has affected his mental health. Having said all that, I mean, on these occasions when he was clearly the worse for wear, he'd obviously had a few drinks. He may even have been dabbling in some other substances because he has admitted taking drugs himself. Falling out of nightclubs is not a great look. It did to some extent endear him to the country. They thought he was a bit of a jack the lad and like everyone else. And I have to say, I mean, I wasn't there, of course, myself, Elsa. I don't frequent these places, and I wasn't hanging around outside these clubs. But I do find it a bit curious that he must have had his bodyguards with him. Why would you let him walk out the front of a club when there's lots of photographers waiting and stumble into the road and fall into a car or fall out of a car or whatever, or end up in the gutter, or end up flailing around and throwing a punch at a photographer? Why would you do that? I'm sure he could have taken him out the back or cleared away or something. I'm just surprised that they let him get into that situation. I'm not criticising them. It might have been they couldn't control him and he wanted to just walk out there. But I do find it strange that on these 2 or 3 occasions it was allowed to sort of get that far. But whether he knew what was going on at the time, because he was probably fairly he'd had a few drinks, and he might well have been a bit of a heady atmosphere, and he'd been in the club. But I don't know, if he'd had a girl on his arm, might be a bit different. You might be offended and say, well, leave her alone, get back or whatever. But just coming out on his own, there's no need for him to lash out like that. Just either let him take a photograph or just go out the back door.
Well, what I'd first like to say is we've all done things in our teens and our 20s which we're probably not particularly proud of now, apart from you, Phil, obviously.
Obviously, yeah.
I think that, give him a break. How do you know? You're saying about maybe using a back route or a rear exit to go out. There could have been paparazzi outside another exit. They could have had all covered. So he would have been damned if he did, damned if he didn't, whatever entrance he used to vacate the nightclubs. You know,
Was this the kind of behaviour you expect from a Prince of England, though? Is this the kind of behaviour you expect of, yes, people in their 20s might get into scrapes, but he's Prince Harry.
This is before he joined the armed forces, isn't it? So, yeah.
He is Prince Harry, but his mother died in tragic circumstances, pursued by the paparazzi. And I do think that has triggered a lot for him. He's not undertaking a royal engagement by going into a nightclub. He's being, Harry Wales, as he was then, going and having a bit of fun, letting his hair down with his mates, and then wanting to go back home.
But Elsa, not everybody in their 20s goes out and gets in fights outside of nightclubs, despite if there's provocation by paparazzi. Not everybody.
I don't know
William
whether
didn't do it.
I wasn't there. I didn't see a fight, and you can see there was one statement from various photographers, and there was a statement from Clarence House. So
let's talk about the Clarence House statements, because you did work at the palace, but you didn't work.
So I
for
worked
Harry.
at Buckingham Palace, working for the late Queen, and of course there were separate officers. So the Prince of Wales had Clarence House, his own press team.
But there were statements saying, basically supporting Harry's side of the story. Was he being protected rightfully by Buckingham Palace?
By Clarence House.
By Clarence House, I apologise.
I think, again, you can only, as a press officer, you can only act on the information you're given at the time. So if Prince Harry said to his press office, actually, it was them, I didn't get into an altercation, you can only actually report on the information that you're given. And clearly that's what he did do.
This is all 20-odd years ago. We have to sort of remember that it was quite a different era. The News of the World was still going. Newspapers and magazines were willing to pay very large sums of money, tens of thousands, sometimes even more, for certain photographs. And there's no doubt that some paparazzi did go too far. Some of them used to provoke. When they used to follow Diana around, they used to say things to her, and they used to, touch various members of the royal family, to try and provoke them as he came out. And I'm not excusing that for one moment. That was completely and utterly wrong. And the behaviour of some of them is absolutely disgraceful. But unfortunately, there are good photographers and bad photographers, and good reporters and bad reporters, and good and bad in everything, So he kind of fell for the bait sometimes, I think, when they were out to sort of rile him and get the worst possible picture from him. When they wanted a picture of him falling over.
Of course they did.
And sometimes it worked. But so
and
I'm
also sometimes your judgment is slightly impaired when you have had a glass or two of alcohol.
I'm sure it is, But so it was a different era. I don't think it would happen today. I don't think if in 5-6 years' time George was in a nightclub in London, that there will be the same, group of people. I might be wrong, but I don't think he would be followed around to the same extent.
Was he fair game, though, Phil? Because, we know that celebrities, and I know members of the royal family aren't celebrity, but the lines do blur. We know that there are huge teams behind them to kind of curate this kind of image. He's a Prince of England. Should we not know that he gets very, very drunk in nightclubs and can sometimes throw his hands around?
It's a very, very difficult one. I think personally we do have a right to know what they get up to if you're paying for them, if you're paying for their security, and I think you do have a right. But there are lines to be drawn. It's a question of balance. But sometimes they went too far, but sometimes he went too far. So everyone probably could learn from it and sort of say, well, we could have done that better. But it was a kind of very sort of heady time, and there was a lot of money flying around. There was a big tabloid circulation war, and people probably went to great lengths they should have done.
In his defence, then it was often with photographers which were were kind of antagonistic or whatever, trying to get the picture. It was never kind of malicious with other drinkers or other people he was out with. There was none of that with Harry, was there, in his defence? But this kind of reputation of a party prince who would like a scrap, and then ended up going into their serving very with honour in our services. Did it tarnish his reputation and the royal family's reputation, or did it in many ways enhance it?
I don't think it tarnished it. No, I don't. I think it was a distraction probably from all the other things that the royal family were doing at that time, because if they're out doing engagements and supporting their charities, the only headlines and the only photographs in the tabloids are going to be of Harry outside Boujis or various nightclubs. So yes, that's a distraction, but I don't think it particularly tarnished not insofar as, you look at today's events.
It tarnished his reputation when he, was allegedly dabbling in drugs, but you can't...
But this is not about drugs, this is about getting drunk and coming out of nightclubs.
Well, we don't know, do we? I mean, he could have been...
Well, he's written about drug taking in Spare. I can't remember if there's any drug take when he's written about any drug taking in this kind of era about these nightclubs, just to be clear.
No, these specific incidents. No, there might not have been drugs involved there, but he did get involved in, and he was supposedly was taken to a clinic, wasn't he, to sort himself out. So that damaged his reputation, and I think that is something which you could argue is a legitimate public interest if you've got a somebody who's quite high up the pecking order taking drugs, and is illegal, then it's not unfair to highlight that.
Let's just concentrate on there were a lot of photographers. You look at these pictures, there were a lot of photographers out there once they knew that Harry was kind of in a nightclub. But we know that he doesn't like photographers. We know that he doesn't like the press. We also know that a lot of that came from what happened to his late mother. But how big an impact on what we're seeing now? He's suing newspapers. He's complaining about coverage. How much of what he perceives as bad treatment when he was in his 20s? How much of an impact do you think that has had on the Harry that we know now?
I think a lot, but I think it goes much further back than that. I mean, I remember following him around as kids. When they were only 5, 6, 7 skiing trips. I remember him looking at us in the press pack and saying, bloody photographers, And also so it was very aware of it from a very, very young age. And of course, when they were with Diana, there were massive packs, waiting to see them. And of course, in those days, and I have to say we, because I was one of them, we used to follow them on their holidays as well. It wasn't just a question of going on a royal tour. It was skiing holidays, Caribbean, all sorts of places. It was dreadful.
And I remember seeing...
It was awful.
And I remember seeing, the images of the late Princess of Wales on a skiing trip with the boys and coming up to photographers and just, pushing the cameras away. And that was in front of the boys. So clearly that's going to have an impact on how, William and Harry viewed photographers and reporters. Just seeing it firsthand how their mother dealt with it and how upset and angry and frustrated she got with it.
Yeah. There were scuffles. Let's be honest. Despite the back and forth kind of statements about who said what, who did what first, there were scuffles. Is Harry a reformed character? Could you ever see him falling out of a nightclub in Hollywood and having rows with photographers these days?
I think his lifestyle is too pure now, don't you? I think it's very much...
I've always thought that he's lacking a group of mates there that he can go and have a beer with. I think if he had a group of 4 or 5 friends like he used to have in London, that ex-army guys or whatever, that he could let his hair down and have a few beers and go to a hockey match or whatever they do out there, a basketball game. As opposed to going with her, actually have a group of male friends. I mean, it all sounds a bit misogynistic, but, I think it would do him good. And I think it would... he could let off some steam, and I'm not saying he should get drunk and start falling out of nightclubs and punching photographers, but if he could actually go out and let his hair down, have a few drinks, enjoy himself, and talk to his mates, I think that would be a good thing. And I don't get the impression that happens.
I agree, and also not only his mates, his family. And you just think how close he was with his brother, people like Mike Tyndall. There's all those reporting after Zara and Mike's wedding, which they all went and, got plastered, at the wedding reception. There was a group of sort of mates there in the family that they could all let their hair down and have that sort of lived and shared experience, which we don't really understand because we're not members of the royal family.
And just finally, we touched on it, but I said we've never seen William falling out of nightclubs, punching or having scuffles with photographers. But looking to the future, Phil, you touched on it. Are we going to see George, Louis, Charlotte, Archie, Lilibet, this kind of behaviour?
Well, we just don't know. That's the fascination of it. Fast forward 5-10 years and we'll find out. But whether there be hordes of photographers hanging around nightclubs when they do start going to them, remains to be seen. But it's a different world. There isn't the money to be made out of it as there used to be. So by the time they become that age, the world could be a very different place. But no, it's very interesting to see what happens, but I don't think it'd be as bad as this.
But also the world's a different place. And if you think about, you growing up in the 70s and 80s and the 60s, where, people smoking on airplanes, they're drinking, at breakfast, the world is a different place. And I think, it depends on how people live their lives.
Yeah, and standards are different, aren't they?
Yeah.
It won't be paparazzi outside the nightclubs, it will be people with mobile phones. George, Charlotte, Louis, Archie, Elizabeth.
And or inside the clubs.
Inside.
You know, that's the point, isn't it? You can ban as many photographers as you like, but everyone's now got a phone.
Everyone's a photographer.
Yeah.
All right, thanks guys, appreciate that. It's really interesting. That's all we've got time for on this week's Royal Exclusive Rewind. My thanks to my guests Phil and Elsa, and to you for watching. Join us next time as we dive back into the Royal Archives to relive another unforgettable moment from royal history.